Hello and welcome to my video guide on how to catch bigger pike. My name is Paul Gustafson and I've been fishing for pike for over 25 years. During that period of time I've caught some pretty big fish, and I'm going to demonstrate some of the techniques that I've adopted over that period of time to catch some of the better ones. With me for this programme is an old sea fishing friend of mine, Austin Ashman. Well, Austin, are you looking forward to experiencing this new branch of fishing?
As you know, I'm a deep sea fisherman. I'm prepared to come along and do the netting for you, and hope at a later date to pick the rod up and do the fishing myself.
Well, later in the programme you can see how Austin and I got on when we tried our hands at winter fishing in a gravel pit, and how that contrasted with a day out we had on the river in the summer. But first, let's look at the fish itself and find out something about this magnificent creature. The pike has become one of the most efficient underwater predators of all time, and relies on its excellent eyesight, speed and a series of organs which make up the neuromass system. These are responsible for detecting the range, bearing and movement of its prey, and are exquisitely sensitive to water being displaced around its body. Looking at the pike in the water, notice the pectoral and dorsal fins moving delicately so as not to disturb its own neuromass system. And the eye, perfectly positioned, can easily spot prey at close range. This dace stands little chance against the hungry pike. Unusually, the pike grabs and swallows the fish tail first. Well, as many of you are probably aware, rivers can become out of sorts in the winter, and this is where gravel pits come into their own. So Austin and myself set off one mild February morning to see what we could catch. Right, Austin, we're on time anyway.
Yes, it looks a perfect day for it too.
Yeah, it is.
Bit of frost, but...
Yeah, we had a bit of frost overnight, but you expect that with virtually a full moon.
Will that make much difference, or?
Well, I've never been a great believer in fishing gravel pits in frost, but I thought I'd bring you down here this morning.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of roach and bream accumulating around this area, and I think we ought to give this a go.
That means the pike are about in this area.
The pike will be in this corner, I should imagine, and although it's been cold overnight, we're going to get the sun on the water about 10:30. I like to arrive on the water before the light breaks through, so that I am set up and have my baits cast out into position before the light intensifies. I like the bib and brace myself, so I've got plenty of movement in the upper body. With the one-piece straight jackets, as I call them, you're
restricted, aren't you?
You're very restricted. Arriving this early is really important, as some pike will feed on first light, and I always like to give myself the greatest possible chance. It is also important to arrive early to get some idea of feeding spells, so fishing a pit for a complete day helps in recognising feeding periods. My time can then be utilised properly, and I can fish 2 or even 3 pits in a day. Well, there's a ripple out there now, Austin, and that's what we were hoping for.
Yes.
I never like to fish in flat calms, and this ripple is heaven sent as far as I'm concerned. So that's marvellous. I've always found, Austin, that pike feed far better with a ripple on the water, because the light is bent and refracted.
Yeah,
and
it breaks up the mirror vision.
It breaks up the mirror vision, and they can creep up on their prey and take advantage of it.
Yeah. That's a canopy.
Yes, this is bow-framed landing net. These are solid fiberglass arms, and solid aluminium spreader block. Mm-hmm. And what I've found in the past is that if you break a draw cord, This is about 70 or 80 pound nylon coated wire. You can't replace your draw cord while you're fishing. So we came up with the idea a few years ago of being able to unscrew this and put your draw cord through this.
Oh,
so
I see.
If you break your draw cord,
you can do it quickly. You can
do it quickly while you're on the bank. But that's my landing net, and that's 13 years old, 14 years old, and although it looks a little bit rough and ready, it does the job.
It is rough and ready, but it's a good job.
It's like me, I'm rough and ready. For this particular pit, I have brought along both 11-foot rods with a through action for close range work and heavier 12-foot rods which will enable me to cast out half mackerel at range. Beats the old tank aerials, doesn't it, Austin?
Yes, it does. The trouble is
Deadbait, of course, is usually quite selective and normally picks out the better fish. So today I am using half mackerel, which I can present both at close and long distance. So there it is, Austin, as you haven't done this before.
That's right.
They're 2 size 8 trebles, extra strong. And they're very loosely pinned into the side of a mackerel. And you can see I've chopped the tail off here.
Yes.
And I've chopped across the mackerel, and this will basically go out like a bullet.
Yeah, that stops, that with the tail off, stops it fouling the line,
It stops it fouling the line, and it stops it twisting and turning in the air when you cast it.
Yeah.
So that this mackerel is going to go out like a bullet, basically. So if you look at the rig carefully, Austin, you'll see that the hooks are not supporting the bait at all.
No.
There's a loop of line put round the root of the mackerel's tail. As you can see, the loop of line from the root of the tail leads up to a plastic bait supporting link.
Yeah.
And that link is taking all the weight and it's taking all the thrust of the cast. So the hooks, in fact, are not doing any bait supporting.
I see there's no pressure on the hooks.
There isn't any pressure on the hooks at all.
No.
The important thing is that the hooks clear the bait. A lot of pike fishermen bury their hooks into the bait, and of course they get a run, they get a take, and they strike, and the hooks don't come out of the bait, and they're not really using a treble hook to its full potential.
No.
I like to see both trebles come clear of that bait, and hopefully if we get a run, maybe in a half an hour, an hour's time, you'll see exactly what I mean. The other thing I've done with this rig is that I brought the wire through this loop of line. You can see it is a loop of line, so that I get my bait back as well, because I don't want to leave a lot of free baits laying around on the bottom. If there's free offerings out there, then the pike are likely to pick up the free offerings instead of my bait.
That's very good thinking, actually.
That was a 3-pound test curve rod. These rods have got a 4-pound test curve, and they are heavy rods. But when you're casting out a 6, 7 or 8 ounce frozen mackerel, you need a heavy rod. And occasionally I do use these rods for jack dead baits.
I see. Okay, well.
Okay, so we'll see if the rig works, shall we?
I missed him.
Nice to see 1 or 2 birds around anyway. I felt reasonably confident as my baits were cast at range towards the features I knew to be present in this unfished gravel pit.
Got it?
Yeah, that's it, Austin.
Lovely.
What we can't see...
Pardon?
What we can't see is that there's a submerged gravel bar out there in this corner.
I see.
I've put that bait just on the drop-off, just on the side of that gravel bar.
Yes.
So hopefully we might get a take on that rod. You've noticed that I'm making a bit of a mental note where I'm casting these baits.
I've just begun to think, well, it's obvious you've done the ground view of this lake.
Yeah. I've picked out that tree on the far bank. It's important to me that I can put a bait there again and repeat the cast.
Yeah.
Because if I get one fish, there's probably another fish in the area.
So you more or less got, your distance of your cast to get to that
I know roughly the
bar,
distance, where the bait landed across, level with those rushes over there.
Yes.
And of course, dead in front of me, we've got that
Oh, I see. You've got your
the
bearing
tree.
that way. Yes, yes, yes.
But a lot of pike anglers, they cast out a bait, get a take, and they don't know where they've cast that bait. They've forgotten where they've cast that bait, and they can't repeat that cast.
Yeah, I see. So possibly where there's one, there's two or three more.
There could be two or three, and especially at this stage of the season. I made a point of pulling the line really tightly up to my baits so that I would get an immediate indication of a take. This location did not prove to be that productive initially, but it wasn't long before we got a run on another bait positioned further down the bank. That's away, Austin.
I'm on your left.
This is away. You're on your left. Okay. I think this is a better fish, Austin. This is a better fish. Looks a 20 anyway from a distance, but we'll find out and see what it is when we get it in. It looks a nice fish. Well, it's a double anyway, I think, Austin. Get it right in the net.
Right up.
Good boy. Well done.
Here's a nice one.
That's a nice fish. That's a nice fish, Austin. Great. Smashing. Okay. Beautiful. This was a nice fish, which was beautifully marked and in good condition. She was really lively, and we got her back into the water as quickly as possible. However, I was hoping for even better things to come. And aren't those fins beautiful?
Beautiful condition.
Yeah,
right through, isn't he?
He hasn't seen a hook before.
No.
But there we are. So we've had our first
That's the one we're after.
nice pike, Austin. Nice fish.
Yes, very
and
nice.
I think that's worth coming for, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yes.
So, shall we?
Beautiful job.
We'll slip him back in
Yes.
nicely. Smashing looking fish. And there he is. Quite a formidable mouth on them, haven't they? And if you look at those nostrils, very good sense of smell. So we'll plonk him back. We'll just hold him there for a moment. And away he goes. Right, Austin, now you see what I mean? You've got to keep the rod up high.
Yeah.
It's very weedy out there. And he's pulling against that weed, you can see him. I've got to lift him out of that. And this is where these heavy rods come in. I don't know if it's a massive fish, but he's hooked anyway.
Yeah.
It's only a small one, but you saw the way we had to get him up out of that weed.
Yeah.
Right, and if you could just put the net under that, Austin. Well done. Good. And always hold the net by the arms, never lift it by the handle. Okay, good.
Right.
And we'll lift that fish out of the water. Right, straight onto the sack. It's a nice little fish, Austin.
He is a nice one, isn't he?
He is a nice fish. Now, you can see here what I said earlier, Austin. We get our bait back. That's the first thing, okay?
Yeah.
And I've hooked that pike, and you can see this has just been caught. This is not done for the cameras. There's the hook in the corner of the mouth. be careful with hooks in the net, okay?
Yes.
So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this fish away from the net,
I'll move
okay,
the
all
net.
together.
Yeah.
If you could move the net, a firm grip of the fish, if I could just take those forceps. Because there's a lot of gravel on this bank, we're going to lay this little chap on this sack, and you can see I'm coming astride of this pike, astride of this fish. I don't want this fish to damage itself. And it's been out of the water long enough now. I'm putting one hand under the gill raker, and you can see there is the hook in the side of the mouth.
Yeah.
And all as you do, Austin, is just lift that out, okay? The pike hasn't touched the gravel.
No.
There's nothing to be afraid of. There's over 600 teeth in there.
Yes.
And if handled the wrong way, then they're dangerous.
You're in trouble.
This is no problem at all. Not to be afraid of.
Yeah.
If the fish is handled properly.
Yes.
Okay, it's lovely fish. These gold bars of what they've got when they're young.
Yes.
After a couple of years, they begin to break up and they get these lovely oval dapple spots because they're hunting in deeper water.
Yeah.
These are far better for camouflage in deeper water than what these
I
bars
see.
are.
Yeah, this is like for in the weed and all.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it's a nice little fish.
Lovely
It's in
condition,
good condition.
isn't he?
So
Yeah.
let's get that back. And we'll slip that back in the water. And there
There
she
he
goes.
goes.
And that pike hasn't been hurt at all.
No.
Of course, location is one of the most important factors when fishing any gravel pit, because if we can't find the pike, we certainly won't catch them. This is where a deptho plug or an echo sounder is invaluable, as they will give the angler rough depths of any contour information within the pit. We can then fish the water with greater confidence and understanding. There are pits which have points that protrude and divide bays, and any pike navigating from one bay to another can be intercepted. Therefore, they are really commanding points to fish from, and if they have submerged islands in front of them, then so much the better, as pike can also ambush their prey. Shallow areas with plateaus are also worth trying, when the sun's rays warm up the shallow water. This in turn attracts plateau feeders such as roach and bream, and of course the pike are never very far away. In cold weather, deep troughs can fish really well, and the area directly in front of the island on this pit contains a huge population of bream. I have found that pike will hunt along the outskirts of the trough on the drop-off in about 12 feet of water. Other pits may have sticks and trees in the water. These areas offer the pike cover and refuge from open water and are excellent places to fish. So remember, for continued success in catching good pike, research into any pit is of the utmost importance. Okay then, Austin, let's do the business on this.
When you're ready. Looks like a good one.
I don't think it's massive, Austin. Having said that, you never can tell. Some of these big fish do come in gently.
keeping this side of your rod.
See the weed caught on the line there, Austin?
Yeah.
This is why we're using fairly heavy line. Oh, it's not a bad fish,
not a bad
Austin.
fish.
He's not a bad fish.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a nice fish.
Yeah.
They're going quite well.
In beautiful condition. These
Oh, they
pike,
are.
aren't
It's a lovely pit, this as well.
they? Yes.
It's nice when they haven't been fished for and been touched. He is going well, this fish, Austin.
He is.
And here he comes.
Come on, gently.
I'll pull him over nicely. He's not a bad fish, this.
No.
And
Beautiful.
we've got him.
He's
Beautiful. And
He's a
there's
nice fish.
another nice double. Isn't he? I'm delighted with that, Austin.
He is a beautiful fish.
Delighted. Okay. If we can put him straight over onto this sack, Austin.
That's it.
Again, keep him off the gravel. Oh, yes.
He is super fish, isn't he?
Yeah, look at the colours on that, Austin.
Beautiful.
Isn't that a lovely fish?
Yeah.
Let's come round. A powerful fish in here. If you can just
Do
hold
that
that
taut,
trace
yeah.
for me, Austin. I'll just slip the hooks out of this.
The teeth in that one.
It's not deep. It's just in the corner of the mouth, and
Yeah.
if you could just pull that out now, Austin, that bait will just pop out. Go on, nice hard pull. I'll lift it out with a forceps. And that's one heck of a mouth, isn't it?
Condition of them
Oh,
is really
they're gorgeous,
superb.
aren't they?
Yes.
Absolutely gorgeous. And that one, look, absolutely mint. Never seen a hook.
Yeah.
We won't weigh him, but you can see it's a reasonable fish. If you could just slip that net out. I'll just put him in this sack here, just to carry him down the bank. I mean, this is a precaution I use. A fairly decent fish like this, heavy fish, it's powerful fish. I wouldn't like to slip and drop him.
No, that's quite
Put
right.
him in the sack, and whilst they're out here, they're all right in a liquid environment. And there he is. Who's the prettiest, me or the pike?
The pike, of course.
The pike, of course. Delightful.
He's a delightful fish.
Okay. And we just slip him back. And you notice the colours, Austin?
He's away, beautiful.
The
he is.
markings. And away he goes.
Look at that flick.
Well, Austin,
That's brilliant.
a good day.
Yes.
A good
Thank you very
day.
much.
Well, Austin, that was a nice day, wasn't it? Not the biggest fish I've ever seen, but we did catch some hard fighting fish nevertheless.
Well, it really opened my eyes to see how pike did really go as you said.
River piking is of course a very different thing altogether, and a few weeks ago Austin and myself set off in my boat to experience the hard-fighting, athletic weirpool fish.
Well, Austin, last time we came here, we had about 15 or 16 doubles, didn't we? Best fish was 21 pounds 7. And what a day that was, wasn't it? It was unbelievable, actually. We had a couple of... The weather was just the same as this, so maybe as we approach this weir, looking back on the day we had last year, Austin. Anyway, 21.7, 2 or 3 19s, 18s, all good fish, and we'll see if we can do something similar to that today. Just in here, this is where we had them, Austin, last time. Just by this slack water here.
The weirpools of the Upper Thames are capable of producing outstanding sport and offer fast and furious pike fishing with lots of big doubles and a sprinkling of 20s with the occasional bigger fish.
They're really great for this type of job, you know, Austin, these multipliers. Abu make the best multipliers in the world still, Austin.
On this occasion I have opted to use 3-pound test curve rods coupled with multipliers and will concentrate on the sink and draw method with fresh trout for bait.
Well, Austin wanted to eat these trout last night, but I managed to keep them for bait today. And we've killed them freshly. You can see they're lovely and flexible, they're nice and fresh. And I like to use a fresh bait. Frozen baits are all very well, but I've also found that trout, when they're frozen, tend to split up. The bellies split up and they only last 2 or 3 casts. But used fresh, there's nothing like them. So we'll place the dead bait wobble bar down the throat of the trout. Pin the first treble through top and bottom lip and just nick the lower treble, the bottom treble, very loosely into the flank of the bait, and that can be cast out.
My first cast, using an underarm technique, was aimed at the white water just to the right of the boat. It's worth noting, incidentally, that the rate of retrieve and technique used are of the utmost importance.
And we'll bring the bait right the way across the fast water, let it swing round in an arc on the crease. We can draw it through some of the back eddies, and we're really searching the water with this method. You can let it flutter down, bounce off bottom, let it ride up in the current. You can do an immeasurable amount of things with a well-used wobble bait. And for this type of fishing, there's no doubt the multiplier I'm using is the tool for the job. You've got a lot of control, a lot of thumb control. They're light. And of course, when you've got a rod in your hand, as I have for 13 or 14 hours in a day, you've got to have a fairly light reel. Fixed spool reels are no good for this job. The rate of retrieve is very, very crucial. We've got to allow a big pike enough time to make up its mind whether it wants this bait and bring it through the striking range or the striking zone slowly enough for a big pike to grab the bait. A lot of anglers, when they practice sink and draw, They wobble in the bait far too quickly, and they pick off plenty of small fish. Fish has just taken that bait. Right, I'm going to wind down to this fish. Come on. He's shooting straight across that weir, and I had trouble staying in contact with him. This is not a bad fish, Austin. Good. Going very well. Big swirl there. Yeah. He's going right under the boat. And he's going straight across that white water, Austin. And these river pike, they don't mind this fast water.
It's amazing the strength he's got.
Oh, they've got amazing strength, Austin. Look at him. This is a powerful fish, Austin.
Yeah, I see. Oh, he is. He's a good one.
Yeah, it's a good fish, this.
He's a biggie.
They're really pulling these rods around, aren't they? You really got to give them some welly.
I won't open the neck yet, get inside.
Come on. Oh yes, this is a nice fish.
Okay, you want to come down.
Just net that fish. And that's beautiful, Austin. I'm really pleased with that.
Yes.
There's a double figure river pike caught on sink and draw using the wobble bar.
Beauty.
And I'm really pleased with that, Austin.
Congratulations, mate.
That's great.
Look at that.
And that's two.
Beautiful job. Didn't it?
Move that.
Look at the teeth in that thing.
This is a nice fish. I stand astride of them, Austin, to stop them flapping about and stop them hurting themselves.
Right.
So this is why we've got this padded flooring to keep them off the floor of the boat.
It's nice to see
What-
you've got some respect for the fish.
That's right. It's very important, that, actually.
Absolutely.
But we're going to get him straight back. It's a lovely fish.
Lovely condition, isn't it?
16, 17, 18 years old, maybe.
So that could reach 40 pounds, 45 pounds.
Well, river pike, if they make 20, 25 pounds, they've done very well, actually. Right, let's...
You've got to hunt for everything, don't you?
They have. Let's put this fish back. Let us get it back in the water as quickly as we possibly can.
Well, a great fish for starters, which put up a fantastic fight and was in superb condition. Earlier, I had noticed roach scattering across the surface, and I was sure that some big fish had taken up stations behind some boulders on the tail end of the weir, so I decided to concentrate on that area next.
This is a big, powerful fish. He's boring deep, Austin. Look at him go. It's a powerful fish, this, Austin.
Yeah. Not servicing on yet. There you go. Want him in?
Not yet.
Want him now?
Take him now.
Right, when you're ready.
Whoa! That's a better one, Austin.
Good job, yeah.
Yes, that's more like it. Right, can you just pull up on that,
Yeah,
Austin?
I'm pulling now.
That's it, that's got it.
That's beautiful.
Super fish, Austin. You can see I stand astride of them, kneel astride of the fish, so they can't shake about in the boat.
Yeah.
But
The rubber matting, as you said.
yeah, that's right. And this fish went really well, as you saw.
I wish
It's
it
a
did.
better pike, and
Top condition, huh?
oh, they're absolutely mint condition. And look at that.
Super.
Another female. Cracking pike, aren't they?
Beautiful.
These river pike.
Super
Okay.
job. Perfect predator.
Slipping back nicely. So I say they get a bit gassed up. They blend in beautiful with this water, don't they, Austin?
There you go. Back to the deep.
Contrary to popular belief, many river pike like to feel the push of water on their backs, and when they want to pull in out of the main current, simply tuck themselves in behind boulders and debris strewn across the bottom. They can also attack their prey from such places, and it is these snaggy swims that often produce the best results. Along the middle of a pike's body are a series of tiny holes which make up the neuromass system. This is responsible for accurately detecting moving objects, and it is this, coupled with their excellent eyesight, that help make them the perfect predator. Therefore, our baits must move through the water in a realistic and lifelike manner in order to provoke a strike. Austin and myself continued fishing for the rest of the afternoon, catching some more doubles along with some smaller fish, and enjoyed an excellent day's sport with some more hard-fighting pike from the Weirpool. Well, Austin, another superb day, and in a fortnight's time I'm going to take you up to the Scottish lochs to troll for some of the big pike which I know exist.
Well, what we've just done, Paul, is unbelievable. And what you said about pike fishing is a marvellous experience. I didn't believe it could be this great.
Later in the programme I'll be giving an in-depth demonstration of my techniques concerning tackle, bait and casting. I'll also be chatting to one of the country's leading experts on pike and pike fishing, Fred Buller. To learn more about the pike and its behaviour, I took a trip to the beautiful Buckinghamshire countryside in order to visit one of the country's leading experts on pike and pike fishing, Fred Buller. Fred is the author of several definitive books on the subject which have received worldwide acclaim. He invited me into his study, which was a goldmine of information and intrigue. I began by asking him why the pike has become such a successful predator over such a long period of time.
I think that it's a matter of them being in a niche, and they have developed the equipment which perfectly suits this particular niche. Yes. Having a big mouth is a good thing. Having big teeth is a good thing. Yes. Being built in a way that makes them very fast swimmers over a very short distance, obviously, is a tremendous help to a predator. Yes. But why I'm interested in the niche aspect, Hugh Fawkes told me that they occasionally get pike in his river, in the Cumbrian Esk. Yes. And these are fish that have escaped from a lake tarn way up in the mountains, where they flourish on a diet of perch and sticklebacks. Occasionally they get into the river. When he spots one in a particular location, in a particular pool, and marks it down, he has found that the next time he spots it, it's usually 3 or 4 or 5 pools lower down. Yes. And over that season, after first being spotted, it gets lower and lower, and then it disappears. Yes. So it eventually gets washed out to sea. You see, it doesn't fit into that niche. It can't flourish where you've got mountain torrents, very fast water. Mm. But in the niche that it has found for itself, it's perfect. And the evidence of it lasting so long is the evidence itself.
Fred, if anybody asked you how big pike actually do grow in this country, what upper limit weight-wise would you put on pike?
Well, I think historically, possibly, I'm fairly sure in my own mind that the 1860 something pike caught on Loch Derg is genuine, because I've looked at the newspaper cuttings, I've read the accounts of the witnesses, and most importantly, the size given, the length given for that fish ties in perfectly with the material that we have, the data that we have, which predicts the length, the weight of a pike from its length and girth. And they didn't have that information. So I think exceptionally a pike could grow up to a weight of 90 pounds. But of course, having regard to the funny things that they've been doing to rainbow trout, who knows what they can do to pike? Yes. I don't know. But that's something that I'm not particularly interested in. I'm only interested in wild fish. And I think there's plenty of evidence for fish of 60 and 70, and I dare say exceptionally a pike could grow to a weight of 90. Yes. But I think they're much less likely to in this day and age, because the situation that obtained in the old days has gone. When there were much larger runs of sea trout and salmon, which were bringing extra riches from the sea into the lakes, if you take out the contribution they made, then you have to look at what's left, and that's a poorer situation altogether.
Well, I know back in the 60s you were fishing Loch Lomond with Richard Walker and Peter Thomas, and Euphalcus. Do you think there are still very big fish in Lomond? Because I know the situation there has changed somewhat over the last 10 or 15 years.
Well, I think so. So long as runs of sea trout and salmon carry on, and who knows? I mean, we may find ways and means of improving those runs. And when that happens, then the potential will certainly come back. But I couldn't rule out the possibility, even with the smaller runs of salmon and sea trout, that exceptionally pike may still grow to a weight of 50, 60 pounds in Loch Lomond. I wouldn't be, to answer your question, I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow there was a headline, 55, 65 pound pike caught in Loch Lomond. No, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yes. Modern day anglers use an incredible range of methods to catch pike. What would you say is the most successful method of catching big pike, Fred?
Well, I think if I were fishing for a big pike because I knew that it was in a certain location, I would fish with a dead bait. I mean, I was totally converted to dead baiting when I became associated with certain of my friends.
Yes.
Prior to that, I used to spin and live bait. I don't live bait anymore because I have found that the dead baits answer the purpose. And of course, having witnessed what can be done with dead baits, I sought to reason why this was the case. And a very simple piece of arithmetic tells me. For instance, if you take the fish, the main dietary item of the Loch Lomond pike, pound, or used to be the main dietary item, those fish range from 1 year to 10, and yet it's very difficult to find pound over 5 years old. So
Yes.
obviously vast numbers of these fish die if they don't become 6-year-olds. And who picks them up? Well, pike and possibly eels. So there is a crop of dead and dying fish which are available to pike every year in a situation like that, and in every situation.
Yes.
So I think that well, the answer to your question is that my method would be dead baiting, but for sheer pleasure, I find that fishing with a plug, especially a surface plug, and see a pike take a bait off the top really is very, very exciting.
Exciting, yes.
That's the way I mostly fish, because I'm lucky enough to be able to fish places where pike can be taken that way.
With that method.
Yeah,
Yes.
but that's quite a different answer to your question.
To the
The
question.
real answer to your question is dead bait.
Dead bait, yes.
Every time.
And have you any preference for dead bait?
Yes, I think that from my own experience, most of the places that I fish where there is a prospect of catching a very big pike, the main dietary item or the favoured dietary item is a member of the salmonida, a trout or a sea trout.
Yes.
So therefore, I would always use a dead trout in preference to anything else.
I was talking to Pete Stone not so long ago, and he told me the sequel to your lost pike, and I was absolutely fascinated in this. Could you tell us that story, Fred? Because I know many modern day anglers would love to hear the full story.
Yes, well, as I have already admitted, the loss of that fish, my friends have tried to cover up for me, and it was entirely down to me, just plain stupidity. But it was on, it was witnessed. It was a very, very big pike. And there it was. Dick said, we'll we'll get it. Don't worry, we'll get it. We'll come back. And so he went off, and he and I came back a month later, because there were 4 of us originally.
Yes.
But Dick and I went back a month afterwards, and he was very confident. I wasn't. And we didn't catch anything of note on the second trip. But we had lots of fun talking to each other, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But the extraordinary thing about it was that my friend Brian Clark, who was the Sunday Times angling correspondent, wrote about it in the Sunday Times, and he got an extraordinary letter. I mean, this happened in 1967, and this person wrote to Brian saying that he'd been walking his dog with his son on the Endrick bank at the same time. Within a week of my losing the fish. And he had found a dead pike, washed up, a huge fish, he said, and it had been attacked by crows and various things, he said, but it was huge. And Brian Clark was kind enough to send this letter to me, and I corresponded with the gentleman. And he said that this pike had a wire trace coming out of the pike's mouth, and the treble hook was in the throat, and it was attached to the top and to the bottom, and had in fact choked the fish, and that was the reason for it being dead.
Yes. And of course Richard Walker put a weight of 45 or 50 pounds almost on that fish, Fred.
Yes. He said it's by far the biggest freshwater fish he'd ever seen in his life, and there it is. But it was a nightmare. It no longer is a nightmare. My dear friend Hugh put me at rest, put my mind at rest. He said it would probably have spoiled you if you caught it, and he said, "Where is it?" Because you've lost it, he said, it doesn't matter, really. He said, your friends know that you put yourself in front of the pike because you worked it out. That was a very good thing. The fact that you lost it was too bad. And he was absolutely right, and I've not worried about it since.
Yeah. I've chosen this rather lovely spot, which is just outside of Oxford, to come and show you some of the deadbait rigs I use for pike. And the first rig is probably the most effective deadbait rig I've used over the past 10 or 12 years. And I use it particularly in gravel pits. The rig itself consists of 2 number 8 trebles. The first treble here is fixed, and as you can see it doesn't slide up and down the trace. The bottom treble is fixed by the way of a crimp or a crimping sleeve, and the trace itself is 28 pound 7-strand trace wire, stainless steel trace wire, and this trace is about 20 to 24 inches in length. Attached to the end of the trace we've got a swivel, and one of the best swivels is a Berkeley. This is a Berkeley swivel from America, and that's attached at the end of the trace wire by the way of a crimping sleeve again. Now the rig itself consists of a plastic bait supporting link. Now what this link is going to do, it is going to support my bait while I cast the bait out. The link, attached to the link, we've got an oval split ring, and the oval split ring is going to be attached to the bottom of the swivel, and all as we do is that we place the split ring onto the swivel, and the link is actually attached.
So that's the essence of the rig. Now, looking at the rig very closely, we've got a flat ridge here, across here, and a loop of line is going to sit on that flat ridge. The loop of line is going to go down to the root of the tail of the mackerel, because I'm going to use a mackerel in a moment. I'm going to show you how the mackerel is cast. So the loop of line comes from this flat ridge down to the root of the mackerel's tail, and the loop of line is going to be shorter than the length of the trace. The hooks are going to be pinned into the bait very loosely, and the bait can then be cast out with ease. Now, when the bait hits the water, the loop of line will fall off this flat ridge and the hooks will be very lightly pinned into the bait. So I think, without further ado, I'm going to attach the trace to the main line, and I'm going to set up a bait for you, and I'm going to show you how the rig actually works. So what we've got is that we've got a length of main line here attached to a rod, and it's quite a heavy rod. In fact, this rod's a 4-pound test curve rod, and it's used for out-and-out deadbait fishing. I'm going to put a knot in the 15-pound main line. I'm going to wet that knot, and I'm going to slide that knot down very gently, giving it a nice hard tug or strong tug at the end. Snip the line off, and there is the deadbait rig actually attached to the main line. The hooks, you'll notice, are barbed. Lots of pike anglers today debarb their hooks. They either crush them with forceps or pliers. I choose to use barbed hooks. This is an instant strike deadbait rig. As soon as a pike picks up this bait from the bottom of the gravel pit in front of me, I'm immediately going to pick the rod up and I'm going to strike. Now, I've used debarbed hooks, I've used barbless hooks and semi-barbless hooks, and I've lost pike on them. I've also used semi-barbless hooks and I've managed to get pike in, but I'm much happier using a hook with small barbs rather than using a hook without any barbs at all. The hook, we mustn't forget, is going to be struck into the pike's mouth. The pike itself isn't going to be deeply hooked, and the barb, to my way of thinking, is the safe link between me and the pike. It's very difficult, sometimes it's virtually impossible, to keep a tight line on a pike, and of course if the hooks are debarbed, the pike may jump out of the water, may come back on itself, and of course you've lost that fish which you've waited 6 or 7 hours for. So I use barb hooks, and that's my own personal preference. But this treble, we mustn't forget, is attached, firmly attached to the wire. A lot of people in the past have had this hook riding up and down the trace. They slip the hook up and down the trace, and when they strike, this hook moves. They don't get a decent hook hold on the pike, and subsequently they've lost the fish. So I prefer to have this hook well and truly and firmly attached to the wire. Now, how I do that, just before I mount the mackerel and show you how it's used, is that before this hook, this treble, the bottom treble is attached, I get the wire and I come back through the eye. I go through the centre of the treble hook, I come through the eye, I wrap the wire 3 times around the shank, I poke it through in the little hole at the bottom which I leave, and I just pull it up tight. That hook then cannot move, and when I strike, I've got a good solid resistance to actually hook the pike. So that's very important. But there again, that is only my personal preference. I know a lot of you like to use hooks which you can slide up and down, which accommodate different size baits. I prefer to make up traces according to the size bait I use, but always have this attached. So let's get a half mackerel and show you how I set up a dead bait. So then we've got our half mackerel, nice fresh mackerel, and I always use fresh baits. I never refreeze my baits. I'm always a great believer in using fresh mackerel. They're only frozen down once. It's a nice fresh bait. And what I do before I set this mackerel up is that I'm going to cut through the tail, because I want to make this bait as streamlined as possible. I want to cast the bait a long way. I don't want the bait spinning in the air, and for long range fishing I want this bait to go out like a torpedo. So the way I do that is to chop the tail off. I'm not going to have this wobbling around in the air when the bait is cast, so we can put that to one side. I'm going to slice down roughly halfway down the bait, and what I like to do is I like to trim the bait, trim it at top and bottom, and that just lets a little bit more juice and blood and oil out of the bait. It's a greater surface area when you chop it around, and that also will fly through the air when I come to cast this bait much easier. So we'll put the head to one side for a moment, and in front of me I've got an old spool of line. Now this is 10-pound main line, 10-pound line here. The main line I'm using is 15 pounds, so this is a weaker link. So I'm going to get a length of this, chop off a length of this line, and I'm going to form a loop, or make a loop. Pull that down. It doesn't really matter whether this is a granny knot or a good knot, as long as it doesn't slip. So there's our loop of line, and you can see that loop of line is smaller than the length of the trace. It's shorter than the length of the trace. I'm going to get the loop of line, this is the knot here, and I'm going to put this loop through this section, pull it up tight, up against the root of the tail, and I'm going to, so that this doesn't slip, I'm going to do that again. So what you've got now is that the mackerel is now set up on a loop of line. I'm just going to put it through a further time for good measure, and this is going to take all the weight during the cast. Now then, what I like to do, especially in the winter, is that there are days where pike only feed once, and you only get one chance at actually catching that fish. If a pike picks up your bait and you actually miss the fish, and your bait comes off your hooks, the pike out in the middle of the gravel pit, or in close, will go off with that bait, which is now lying on the bottom, and it may not feed again for the rest of that day. Now that to me is a little bit unacceptable, so I don't like losing my bait. Now you're going to say, well, how do you get your bait back if the hooks are only attached very loosely? Now the way I do this is that I've got my trace, and you'll notice I'm going to put the trace through the loop. So if I strike and miss, this loop of line is going to be caught on the trebles, and I'm going to be able to get my bait back. Right, so I've taken the trace through the loop of line. This is the important part. The skin of the mackerel is actually tougher than the flesh, and I'm just going to nick very loosely the point of this treble there into the bait, and there is the bait and the hooking position for this bait set up. Now if you try to cast that bait without this rig, the bait would go one way and your treble hooks and terminal tackle would go another way, because the hooks are just not capable of supporting the bait. The loop of line now comes up, and you can see is shorter than the wire trace and is hooked onto the flat ridge, and that ridge is flat. It's got to be flat, because as soon as the terminal tackle and this link hits the water, this loop of line is going to come off and the bait is going to be sat on the bottom. When a pike comes along and picks up this bait, I can immediately strike, and one of these treble hooks is going to be firmly positioned in the pike's mouth. Now there isn't going to be any problem with pulling these hooks out of the bait, and I do want the hooks to come out of the bait. I don't like to see hooks left in a bait on the strike. The reason we use trebles is that they're a great hooking mechanism. So we want to get both of these trebles out of the bait and into the pike and get a firm hook hold. There are a couple of hundred teeth in a pike's mouth, to say the very least, and it's a very hard jaw, and we need a firm hook hold first time. So the pike picks up the bait and I instantly pick up the rod and strike. What will now happen is that these hooks, because they're very loosely attached to the bait, will come out, rip, and they will both clear the bait. The pike is hooked, and even though the pike is hooked, I'm going to get this bait back, because the bait is on the loop of line. It'll be dangling on the loop of line, and that doesn't really worry me because both of the hooks are in the pike. But I'm going to get my bait back, because there may be another pike out there which I want to catch afterwards. And if I leave a free bait out there, that pike may pick up the free bait and not my bait. So it's very important that you get your bait back. So you can see how that works. Let's go over to the gravel pit and I'll hook up this bait again, and you can see exactly how the bait flies through the air, how it lands, and you can see on the retrieve that the loop of line has come off the bait and I get my bait back. So I think we should do that now before moving any further. So we'll attach those hooks very loosely into the skin, and we'll go over to the pit which is in front of me, and we'll do a quick demonstration of how this rig works. So we're going to come over here, and what I like to do when I'm pike fishing, I know there's a feature out there anyway, but I like to pick a point on the far bank. There's also an island out there, and I want to be able to repeat the cast I've made. A lot of anglers cast a bait out, they catch a pike, and they've forgotten where they've actually cast their bait. So we're going to cast this bait, and I'm going to remember where this bait has actually been cast, so I can repeat the cast if necessary. So I'm going to get the bait, and we'll really give it some welly, and we'll get it out there. There's a gravel bar out there, and we've got to try to reach it. And you can see what I mean by the mackerel going out. It goes out dead straight, like a torpedo. Just take the bow out of that line and allow that bait just to sink slowly to the bottom. So the bait's now on the bottom, the loop of line is off the bait supporting link, the hooks are very lightly pinned into the bait. We've cast that bait maybe 60-70 yards, and I know that if I get a run, I can pick up this rod immediately, strike, and I know that both hooks are going to come out of the bait and I'm going to get a firm hook hold on the pike.
So let's put the rod in the rest and we'll tighten up to it. You'll notice that I've got the tip of the rod sunk so that I don't get any leaves or rubbish on the surface giving me false alarms. Well, I'll reel the bait in just for our purposes, and you'll notice that I'm going to get the bait back. So that if you do miss a fish, you're not leaving a freebie out there on the bottom. And you can see, although the hooks are only lightly pinned into the bait is trapped on the trebles and I get my bait back. Now it wouldn't matter whether those hooks are in a pike, I'd still get my bait back and I'd be able to use that bait again if necessary. Now there are some gravel pits which haven't got a great deal of weed on the bottom, and you saw just then that I cast out and I could get a tight line right the way up to the bait. Now there are areas of this gravel pit which have got a clear gravel bottom, and if I come to tighten up to the bait and I haven't got any weight on the trace, I find out I can't do it. So the little dodge I use is to bite a couple of swan shots on the trace, and that adds a little bit of weight to my terminal tackle so I can get a tight line right up to the bait. It's important, and we've got to remember that a pike might pick up the bait, it may sit on the bait, and it's really important that as soon as it picks up the bait, I get some type of indication, because we don't want that fish swallowing the bait and damaging itself. So I'm going to move over here with exactly the same rig. It's a shorter rod, it's a 3-pound test curve rod, 11 foot. I like these rods. And we're going to cast over to this gravel bar, and you'll see that I can tighten up to the bait because of the swan shot, and I can get a nice tight line right the way back to the alarm. So we'll pick up this bait and we'll get it over there. It doesn't get tangled. Allow that bait to settle. And then you can see when I reel in, I'll pull that line and I've got a nice tight line all the way up to that mackerel. Set the rod in the alarm and submerge the rod tip. And you can see the line is really tight up to that bait. I don't like any slack line at all. So there it is. Now today, as far as bait is concerned, we're really sport for choice. We've got a rainbow trout here, a red snapper, sardines, sand eels, mackerel, and probably one of the most deadly baits of all, in my opinion, a small pike, a small jack. And there are stages in the season where a small pike will outfish any other type of bait. So small pike, we mustn't forget, is an absolutely deadly bait. Now in contrast to gravel pits, some of my most favourite fishing and some of the most exciting fishing I've ever had is on the rivers. And people over the years have asked me what my favourite method is, and it's undoubtedly sink and draw. And for that, a rainbow trout, such as this little fellow here, or a brown trout, makes the ideal bait. They're very tough, they're very flexible, and they're very easily obtainable. I always like killing my bait when I get to the river bank. I don't like to take along frozen rainbow trout or brown trout because it takes all of the action out of the bait. They turn very stiff and they break up very easily. So I kill me bait on the spot, it's nice and fresh, and I can get plenty of action into that bait. Now the rig I use to mount this little fellow on, I've got here, and I'm going to show you. Now it consists, again, of a 20-inch length of wire trace, but attached to my top treble I've got
my own design of deadbait wobble bar. Now the bar is pushed inside the fish and it's going to give weight to my fish. The fish can be allowed to touch bottom. I can draw the fish up through to the middle depths of the water, right up to the surface. I can let that fish flutter back in a weir pool. I can let it bounce off bottom. I can do so many things with it, and all the time I'm covering the length and breadth of the river. And when river fishing, location is absolutely paramount. It's the most essential part of river fishing, and with this method I can cover vast areas of water. So let me show you how this is mounted. By the way, the deadbait wobble bar is attached to the eye by some carbon Kevlar trace material. It can't be bitten through. I've also used wire, and it doesn't really matter what you use. I don't use nylon because of course the pike can bite through that. So all as I do with a deadbait wobble bar is that the bar is placed inside the trout. I push it well back into the trout, and it doesn't matter that the carbon Kevlar is sticking out because they're not going to bite through that anyway. And I'm going to go through the bottom lip, take the treble up through the top lip, and I'm going to pin this hook into the side of the body very loosely. This is going to take all the weight. It's a good firm hook hold there, and the weight is inside the bait. Now you'll notice that there isn't any weight on the trace. Some anglers bite swan shots onto the trace, or they'll use lead substitutes on the trace, and unfortunately that doesn't help you at all. The weight swings around in the water and it takes any of the action out of the bait. You want all of the action when you're reeling in to be transferred into this bait. You want the bait moving, not the weight on the trace. That's very important. Now with this bait, I can cover all depths of water. I can bounce it off the bottom. I can let it ride up in the current. I can wobble it up on the crease where the weir comes down. I can virtually do anything with this bait, covering all the depths imaginable. Now you'll notice that inside that little trout I've used a ½ ounce wobble bar, and it's enough weight for me to sink that bait and to cast that bait. It is only a small bait, but for bigger baits or smaller baits we use different size wobble bars. For bigger trout, larger trout, I'm using an ounce, ounce and a quarter, and they're pushed inside the bait. For even bigger trout still, we've got an ounce and 3/4, 2 ounces of weight there, and they're very effective. You can also, when you're boat fishing, troll using this method. You can put the rod in the rod rest on the side of the boat. You don't need any float attached, and you can troll using these wobble bars. And of course for sprats and very small baits, we've got these little chaps here. I also use these in the summer when I want to twitch a bait across the surface, over the surface of the water, and I don't want the bait to sink into the weed. So they also have their day, and they're very important. Now earlier I showed you one hooking arrangement for a wobble bait. This is an alternative. You've got 3 trebles attached to lengths of wire, when I can sort them out, and you can see that there's a separate length of wire coming from the eye of this treble hook running down. You've got a treble attached there, and you've got your 3rd treble here. The leading treble is going to go through top and bottom lip, and this treble here is going to go to the left hand side of the body, this to the right hand side of the body. And with this method you can strike virtually immediately, because no matter how the pike grabs the bait, you're going to get a reasonable hook hold. So let's attach this bait, and I'll show you how it's done. So the leading treble through the top and bottom lip,
pin these two side trebles in very loosely. They're not taking the weight, and you can see that the top and bottom lip is pinned together. There's a hook in the left hand side and a hook in the right hand side. Now you'll notice that there isn't any weight pushed inside the bait, and this is because I want this bait to be fluttered in across the surface, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a river or a gravel pit. I'll flutter that in across the surface, and that in the summer when temperatures are very hot can be an absolutely deadly method. I can flutter this bait in on the surface of a gravel pit, and it won't sink down that quickly. The swim bladder inside the bait is attached. I haven't punctured that, and I can wobble that over the weed, and again it's an absolutely killing method for summer fishing. And of course you've got a nice firm hook hold on top and bottom lip. So there it is. Now, in contrast to sink and draw and dead baiting, laying a dead bait on the bottom, I also do an awful lot of float fishing when I'm fishing rivers and gravel pits. And you can see here I've got a fluted float with concave surfaces. Now, the concave surfaces are there for a reason, and a lot of people don't really understand what a fluted float has got to offer. If you've got an upstream wind and you want to send a live or dead bait downstream, what happens is this. With a normal round-bodied float, the water rushes around the float, and with an upstream wind, that float won't move downstream, or it won't move downstream fast enough to get our bait to wherever we want it to go. The concave sides or surfaces of this fluted float, one of the surfaces of that float, even though it turns in the current, will face the current, will get trapped in the concave surface, and that float will be pushed downstream to where we want to send our bait. So the fluted float has got enormous advantages over the round-bodied float when river fishing. Both floats have got their day, but I love using these fluted floats. I've got many other floats too. I do a lot of night fishing on the rivers, and I've got aluminous floats which I use at night, but it's something worth thinking about. Now, you can see attached to the main line I've got a large bead and a small bead. Now, the internal diameter of the small bead is very small, and that is because I don't want the bead to slide up over the stop knot, because if it does that, the float is going to slide up and the whole lot is going to be presented over depth. So this is why I use two beads. Above the bead, you can see dangling on the line is a piece of ordinary pole elastic. Now, this pole elastic is normally used by match fishermen. It's medium gauge pole elastic, and all I've done with that pole elastic is basically tied a granny knot in it. And if I wanted to slide it up, I just wet the line and I can slide that stop knot up. The thing about pole elastic is that it doesn't damage your main line, it doesn't damage the diameter of the main line locally, and it can be reeled right onto the reel, and it can be cast out very easily. It's soft and supple, and it's very easy to tie. At the bottom of the float, I've got a bead above the lead, because I don't want the float damaged. You can see this is it's a bit of an old float anyway. I've got my weight, another bead to keep the weight away from the knot so that the knot isn't damaged, and that's my float set up. So what I'll do is I'll show you how to make a trace, and this is the way I make my traces. I've got some extra strong treble hooks here. These are size 8, and let's attach top treble. Now, what I've done is that I've taken the wire through the eye and back through the eye, and I've brought the wire down into the central part of the hook. I'm going to wrap that wire around 3 times, and I'm going to tuck the wire in through that little gap and pull it down firmly. And there is the first treble attached, and that does not move. For the second treble, I've got a crimping sleeve. Slide the crimping sleeve up. Place the crimping sleeve on the wire. I'm going to snip that end off, and I've got about 1/2 inch protruding from this end of the crimp. I'm going to bend that wire back over, and it's going to go through the eye of this crimping sleeve a 3rd time. My eyes are not what they were, but we can just about manage that. It goes back through the crimping sleeve there, and I'm going to slide the crimping sleeve down, and that's the gap, the type of gap I leave when I'm using a 1/2 mackerel bait. Now all we need to do now is get a pair of pliers or a crimping tool. I'm just using pliers. I'm crimping 1, 2, 3 times, and it's a nice, neat attachment. To this end, I'll snip a bit off the wire, get it nice and straight and smooth. I've got a crimping sleeve which I'm going to slide down the trace. This trace is £28, by the way. I don't use £20 wire. Wire is inherently unreliable stuff, and I've found with £20 wire you get a slight kink in it and it breaks. I've got a lot more faith in £28 wire, and I'm going to do the same, or try to do the same, here, through there. Once, I'm going to put a little bend in it, and I'm going to slip the wire a 3rd time into the crimping sleeve and pull it up on itself, and I'm going to crimp up. And that hasn't taken many minutes, and you're left with a first-rate trace. And what could be simpler than that? So for river fishing, I've mentioned sink and draw, and for me there's only one reel to use, and that's the multiplier. This is an Abu 6001, and it's a comfortable reel to use. And we mustn't forget that when I go out fishing, sometimes I'm in the boat or I'm on the bank, and this rod might be in my hand for 12 or even 14 hours a day. So the reel's got to be light. It's got to be much lighter than a fixed spool reel. You've got much more control with a multiplier. You can feel every little knock and twitch through the line, and they really are the tool for the job. And you can see you've got incredible control with a multiplier, and they really are a joy to use. So this is the tool I'd use every time. Just to round off this section, let's have a look at some of the tackle and equipment available to the modern day pike angler. In front of us we have lure boxes, a compass, deep and shallow diving plugs, lead core line for trolling, crimping sleeves, a deptho plug for finding depths, wobble bars, partridge extra strong trebles,
and a selection of floats. Also, weigh slings, keep sacks and a bow-framed landing net, along with a selection of rods of varying test curves, plus reels and rests. The list is endless really, but all of these items are useful as part of our arsenal to tackle one of our favourite predators.
Well, we've come to the end of this programme on tackle and techniques. I hope you have found some of the methods of interest and are able to use some of the tips I have mentioned. So, from me, it's bye for now, tight lines and good fishing.